VP Critic on the file. He joins us from downtown Toronto. Sean Casey, the designated hitter for the Liberals. Craig, I'll go to you first on this thing. I know the government was sort of blaming the opposition parties for stalling on this. Are you guilty as charged?
I have to admit that I laughed when I heard that line during the press conference, and the minister is somebody I really respect, but he knows that not to be the case. We've stood up in the House to debate the bill and point out, along with other parties, the unconstitutionality of the provisions. And if now they finally decided that they think there might be a problem that's going to the court, it has nothing to do with us delaying in the House. There's not an ounce of accuracy in that claim.
I just want to get your thoughts on this as well, Sean. He says they're not, I know you didn't have your earpiece at that time, but he says it's not a question of the opposition parties slowing this down. Is that your view, or do you think the Liberals are trying to delay it a little bit?
I don't see how that can possibly hold water. Stéphane Dion, since 2007, has been calling for a reference. They've finally taken heed.
To the courts. He said send it to the Supreme Court, right?
He did. He has said repeatedly and consistently since 2007 this is unconstitutional, that it should go to the courts. And furthermore, the last time this was before Parliament was 11 months ago. And how many times have they invoked closure in the last 11 months? I mean,
28, I might count.
As you pointed out in your questions, it just seems a bit hard to swallow that they can jam through 1,000 pages of omnibus budget legislation, but this is stalled. It's inexplicable.
Now, I want to go back to you, though, Craig, on this one, because you are a party that supports abolishing the Senate. And I guess I'm curious, if this is an interim position, why don't you just support the reforms that are in place and say we'll get around to abolishing it when we're the government of Canada?
Well, there's a couple of points. Is that if you have interim reforms to the Senate before any abolition could take place, we'll certainly listen and be supportive. But the fact of the matter is that this is something that needed clarity on the constitutional dimension, but they could have done this 6, 7 years ago. I mean, you did a good job at outlining how long this has been kicking around, and frankly, so did the minister. So the fact that they've waited this long suggests they're not necessarily interested in hearing that it's unconstitutional. I would add one other thing. Why did they wait so long? There were rumors they were going to do this way back in August and September. They've allowed the Quebec Court of Appeal process to go as far as it's gone. People have been preparing their interventions and their submissions to the Quebec Court of Appeal for a while now. And now what are they doing? They're putting the Quebec Court of Appeal in an awkward position to say they might have to make their case moot in order to defer to the Supreme Court. And so even within this latest time frame, it's really inexplicable why they would have waited this long to refer it to the court.
Your thoughts on that, Sean?
I would agree with what Mr. Scott has said. The Conservatives repeatedly say that we are in favor of Senate reform, but their actions are not consistent with the rhetoric. And I entirely agree with this, that there's some sort of a strategic ragging of the puck going on for some reason. It seems to me quite clear that they don't want this dealt with before the next election, and this is a deliberate ploy. And to try to foist blame for it onto the opposition parties is quite disingenuous.
But why do you think they're doing this? I'm curious. This has been part of the ideology, if you want to call it that, of the Reform Party, the Canadian Alliance Party, and the Conservative Party. If it's part of your DNA, why don't you push it forward and get it passed? You don't need to have concurrence by either one of your parties in order to make it happen. I'm just baffled by why they're doing it, and I didn't really get an answer from Mr. Uppal as to why that is. Do you have a theory on that at all, Craig?
Well, I mean, there's any number of theories. You touched on one, which is resistance within their own caucus, including their Senate caucus. The other is, I think Mr. Harper would quite like, if he loses the next election, to have a majority Conservative Senate based on appointments. Keep in mind that despite his claim in 2004 he had never appointed a senator, there have been, I think, over 40 now, and by the time he leaves there will be over 50. And so I think the status quo is going to serve him very well, as I put it before, to try to govern from the grave almost. Not that he's going to pass away, but his party will. But the other thing is that he keeps saying he has no appetite for constitutional discussions, but he knows that reform of the Senate along the lines he's proposing requires constitutional change. So he's basically, if he forced it through, it would still be unconstitutional. He knows it.
Yeah, that's the bottom line here, though, Sean. There is constitutional questions here that have to be settled at the court. So you're not quibbling with them going to the court. You're just quibbling that they took so long to get there.
And I'm also quibbling with their genuine motive. To add to what Mr. Scott just said, another reason for the delay here is at some point they're going to have to sit down with the provinces. They're going to be told that what you're doing you can't do unilaterally. It has to be done with the provinces. Imagine the Prime Minister having to sit at a table with Canada's First Ministers. I mean, it's something that he has doggedly avoided, and the very thought of being put in that forum, I think, makes him uneasy.
All right,
NDP, very well put,
Craig
Sean. Scott.
Well, there you go, the Mutual Admiration Society on the opposition side. Craig, thank you very much. Sean, as well as to you. Have a good weekend, guys.
Have a good weekend.